With that, we are down to agenda item number 3, our flood project updates.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. I'm Andy Bertelson. I'm the Water Services Director for the City of Flagstaff, and Sam Beckett is bringing our presentation to life up here on the big screen, and Sam will be pulling double duty today. He's also our Streets Director, and we anticipate Sam having a busy night for the City of Flagstaff. So thank you, Sam. Looks like we're getting it up on the screen. So I'll go ahead and start. The last update was November 23rd, and the flood mitigation updates, that's specific to the museum fire burn scar flooding, essentially the Spruce Avenue wash. We've made some significant progress since that time, and I'd like to thank Don, the speaker, for noting that specifically on Dortha, and this council approved us moving forward with property easement acquisition, and just anytime there are utilities in those drainage corridors, it becomes very difficult. And so working within that Spruce Avenue wash through the community, all of those difficulties we're facing. And we refer to them internally as, if there are going to be hurdles in front of us, we need to learn how to run them. And so that's what we're working hard to do. In terms of, well, Stacy, now we brought in our resident expert, Stacy Salzberg, to help us get our technical difficulties worked out as well. We also have with us some of our partners, and that's Christopher Tressler, our flood control district and county engineer, and Lucinda Andriani, our deputy county manager for Coconino County. And Don had also mentioned Alan Hayden, who works with Natural Channel Design, and we're very lucky to have Alan as a resident expert in our community on geomorphology, hydrology, and all the things that he studies and does. He has this experience with on-forest measures. And so our team here from Coconino County is going to talk about that a bit as well. And that's really probably the biggest progress we've made. Also, Scott Overton will be bringing forward to you, the City Council, next week on January 4th, so Happy New Year. The Killip Detention Basin in partnership with the Flagstaff Unified School District. And so Scott has made it, and now Sam, his personal mission to navigate that project. And we're very lucky to have him and his partnership with Bob Kuhn at the Unified School District, as well as Greg Clifton, our city manager, and Mike Pence, our superintendent, to really make that a priority as well. So at the risk of stealing everyone's thunder in the presentation, I just wanted to note those things as we work to get our presentation. So here we are. So,
Perfect timing.
So thank you, Council. And Sam, so the first slide we already covered, some background, and really you don't need the background. It's what we gave on November 23rd, but the flood events, mitigation update, then the budget as well. And I know City Manager Clifton, Rick Tatter, and our budget team is working on this element as well, which is in and of itself very complicated and difficult moving forward. Communications, and I think Sarah Langley's on the line. If she's not, we'll cover the communications slide for her. She's been filling in on that communications role, and we're so lucky to have her in that role. She's so, as you all know, she's so professional and just such a hard worker and good contributing member of the team. And then a discussion. So, as you know, we had our first real monsoon season since the museum fire back in 2019. Those real monsoons kind of truthed out the models, if we will. This is something that we had been modeling since 2019 after the fire. And like I told the story many times, once the fire was contained in 2019, before it was contained, Lucinda Andriani was on the line saying, all hands on deck, we need to start preparing for post-fire flooding, and that's something that we have been doing. So as a result, Don and all of our community members face a very real repetitive flood threat downstream. Also, outside of the Spruce Avenue wash and the museum fire burn scar, we had a rare 200-year flood on the south side of Mount Eldon. And during that flooding event and people that were in that area, the reports were it was like nothing that they had seen before in terms of rain. So it also, very extreme rain, and in that extreme rain, it incised those mountain slope channels, and when we say incise, essentially cut those channels deeper than what they already are. So the flood risk has increased. And Gary Miller is going to talk about that particular segment further in the presentation. You'll see some of the photos here. We have the photo on the bottom left, an area off of the end of Appalachia, which is outside the museum fire burn scar in that south side of Mount Eldon event. Then we also have the top photo, which is Sunnyside, and that's something that we've experienced quite often historically. Just in my time with the city of Flagstaff since 2016, we've gotten flooding in those areas several times. And then the damaged fanning wash near Bushmaster. So impacts are community-wide. This map is a bit hard to read, but the green stars indicate public damage we didn't include that private damage, although we know we've had private damage just to protect those that have been impacted. But you'll note a majority of those stars are in kind of the Spruce Avenue wash, but many are outside, and this is that this is that Mount Eldon watershed venturing down into these areas. And then you'll notice in our southwest part of town, this Sinclair Wash area had quite a bit of public infrastructure damages there as well. And then up here in the Rio de Flag, while the Rio de Flag was at full capacity, I don't remember the date, I believe it was in August during that flood event, but anything more in that watershed would have been devastating to our downtown community and this building that we're here in this evening. So I'm going to turn it over now to Scott Overton, and he will talk about the feasibility analysis taking place.
Yeah, good evening, Mayor and Council. Thank you, Andy. Again, good update of a lot of good progress, and I know a lot of you have been tracking a lot of these projects. We do have with us as well this evening Julie Lead from Peak Engineering, and Julie's team is the team that has been contracted to work on this feasibility analysis piece. And if she has some time and you have questions, it'll be a good opportunity for you to ask those directly of Julie and her expertise in this field. But I wanted to give you an update generally on the analysis and the work that's been done. It's been fairly new. We did go through the approval process, and we did mention it at the last update, but a lot of work has been completed to date. They're on track to continue this effort into the spring. You've probably heard us reference this feasibility piece more often than not, because a lot of this work is to help us determine which project moving from short-term to mid and longer-term mitigation is the most important and can be the most meaningful. And we're hopeful that a lot of this work in conjunction with the modeling work really inform us to put our best foot forward and to put dollars best where they belong. Julie's team is working on that at this point. We've started to really get some results back in terms of draft form and kind of the calculations of the existing system in the infrastructure. So that's now at least being peer reviewed within our organization. That's been good forward progress. It was a good benchmark for us to hit before the new year. Not only will that team continue the effort of analyzing our existing infrastructure, but they've also been tasked with more difficult work, which is to take results of the engineering summit and of the flood control district, county and city efforts and ideas and try to formulate those into new alternatives that may or may not be feasible in the coming years. It is very important to know that we meet weekly. It's a robust team of engineers and non-engineers from all agencies. That technical advisory group has been solid in terms of vetting ideas and project work, and I think has been instrumental in probably the biggest benefit, sharing information. So one team can share information with another team, even if they're competitive engineering teams. They've all been tasked with a segment within the wash, and it's proved up to be a really good model that works well for all of them as well. There's no sense in us doing math twice, unless we're checking it, of course, and it's my math. But the sharing of information is really important, and it's been pretty meaningful, and it's impressive when you can sit on that call and one team will ask the entire group for some information and it can get shared within minutes of that request, and it just moves it along so much more quickly. There has also been a request in particular from our team to ask them to really analyze areas and move quickly in tandem with projects that we know we will be delivering. And that is a difficult task because many of the projects we are looking to deliver, our partners within the community and FUSD happen to be in the middle of the infrastructure improvement. So not at the very south end where we would like to start. So they're focusing some of those efforts to help us make sure that what we are doing is meaningful and the best work possible. In addition, this drainage master plan effort, if you recall, we are also trying to analyze the entire watershed and other watersheds nearby. But basically, this really speaks to the piece that J.E. Fuller and Joe Leverich is working on. They're the ones that are doing the hydrology modeling. They're the ones that did the original short-term mitigation work with us in the flood control district. We're now moving that to its next step where it's much more detailed analytics and it's much more based in what happened and occurred over the last summer. They have reported they've completed all their aerial and LiDAR surveys. They are on schedule and looking good for their delivery in January, which was anticipated. So a lot of that work will flow right into the feasibility analysis. And again, their team is on schedule, and we're really excited about this coming down as new data. I think now I'm going to turn it over to Lucinda, correct? For the updates on some of the Forest Service work and the county flood control district pieces.
Thanks, Scott. Good afternoon, Council. It's great to be here. Happy holidays. Just want to provide you with an update on kind of the two elements that the flood control district is taking the lead on, and which are really entirely focused on reducing the level of sediment that's coming into the city. If we don't reduce the level of sediment, the existing infrastructure as well as any new infrastructure that would be constructed, as you're looking at for Dortha, the park, the basins at Killip, they're just going to fill up with sediment and not be productive. So this work is really critical. And as you heard, Natural Channel Designs, they're doing the engineering work for kind of both pieces. We have a piece that's going on the U.S. Forest Service land, and I'll talk about that, as well as a piece that's going on private land, as well as a city parcel just above Linda Vista. I'll talk about both those elements. Both, again, focused on reducing sediment, either reducing the production of sediment, i.e. erosion, or capturing sediment. And Natural Channel Designs has completed a preliminary sediment study and identified that probably through the various measures that we can reduce down the sediment load, probably about 65 to 75% of the sediment that's entering the city, which is significant. That will have a significant, important benefit to flood mitigation within the city. So in terms of those two elements, I'll start with on forest. I think everyone's aware that we were really pleased that we received approval from the Forest Service chief to receive up to $3.5 million. We are working now with the regional contracts manager out of Albuquerque on an agreement between the district, the flood control district, and the Forest Service to facilitate getting that work done and receiving those funds. As we can complete that work, we're likely going to be using what's called a good neighbor authority type of agreement. And the goal is to have that agreement completed and approved by the end of January. Another important element is the National Environmental Policy Act process. So the Forest Service will have to go through and complete what's called the NEPA process, National Environmental Policy Act process, looking at what kind of potential impacts could there be from the projects on forest. And they've put a lot of resources toward this. We're working very closely with Matt McGrath at the District Ranger, who's been just incredibly supportive. And, but that takes time. There are very strict time requirements for public engagement, public involvement, stakeholder involvement, and they expect to complete that by mid-May. Now, we're not expecting, we didn't have any appeals or any issues that came through when we did the same process with Schultz. Prior, working both with the tribes, the environmental community, recreationists that use the area. But obviously, we're going to be working with them to identify if there are any concerns and try to mitigate those concerns. But with not completing that NEPA until mid-May, that's going to be a really short construction period to get it done for monsoon. So we're already in communication with the contractor that's going to conduct that work and trying to figure out a way to stage that work. Hopefully, it's kind of one of these issues of we want a lot of moisture because we don't want to go into fire restrictions and then influence construction, but that's always in the back of our minds as well. So we're really looking at how do we stage these projects to make sure that we can get them done. And there's numerous places on forest that are going to be where the fan areas that we've talked about, where you spread out water so it can slow down, drop out the sediment, several large fan areas, and then several areas, several areas where we're doing erosion control, grade control to reduce down the production of sediment. So that's that process. Again, it's gonna be very tight construction. We'll be doing regular updates to the community as we go through that process. We've done some preliminary engineering, as you see here, and this is one of the very large fans north of Paradise that, again, is really fundamental to capturing the sediment before it goes into the city. So I feel pretty positive about this. I think, obviously the biggest outlier is going to be weather. Do we get into fire restrictions, those kinds of things, but they are pushing very hard on their side. We're pushing very hard on our side. So I feel reasonably confident that we can get this work done by monsoon season. The other element is, of course, the NRCS Emergency Watershed Protection Funding that we received. Again, about $3.5 million. Thank you, Gary. And within that, I'll say that NRCS project, there's 3 areas that we're going to be involved with. One area is there's a 40-acre parcel just north of Mount Eldon Estates, which is a rural residential community, as you know, that's been impacted significantly by the flooding. That 40 acres is not developed currently. We've been working very closely with the property owner there, and to date, she's expressed a fair amount of concern and willingness to work with us. So we're continuing to work with she and her team of representatives to work with her on being able to access that property and construct a fairly large fan there. It's a large flat area where we know we can store a significant amount of sediment. So, and it's starting to erode now, so it's contributing actually to sediment in addition to not performing like an alluvial fan. So that's really, really critical, securing that access to that project, to that piece of the project. The second area is within Mount Eldon Estates itself, and we will again be conducting project work within that area to reduce down the erosion that's taking place there. As well as in some areas, what's happening is where the tributaries cross, the 2 tributaries come together in that area, and as they cross the roadways, they're eroding the roadways, and again, creating more sediment, and then reducing down access for emergency vehicles and so forth. So we're doing some work there as well, and we've had tremendous cooperation from the community there. The third and most challenging piece is actually a city parcel that's just north of Linda Vista. And I think it says on here, It shows this diagram, and this is very conceptual diagram, and I think somewhere else it said it was 3.6 acres, but I think it's closer to 6 acres, I think. I thought it was a little bit larger. It's a set of smaller sediment basins, again, kind of a last catch of the sediment before it comes into the city. And it is challenging for a number of reasons, and we're continuing to evaluate, this opportunity, but it is an important piece of the overall set of pieces in terms of capturing the sediment. But it's very challenging. So this can be very challenging, and for several reasons. First, the historic Beale Wagon Road runs pretty much right through the middle of this. If anybody's aware of the old alignment, and the NRCS archaeologist has identified this. It is not on the historic register, but it's eligible, so therefore it has to be treated as if it was. And so he's working with the State Historical Preservation Officer, the SHPO, to begin that process. Now, this is really critical, and we've had just a lot of discussion with NRCS over the last 3 weeks once this became apparent about what our options were going forward. And we kind of played out with them what were the various options. Could we actually pull this element from the project to be able to continue with the rest of the work, because we cannot start construction until we have all the clearances on this site. So we were concerned about that. We thought, well, if we could break the pieces apart and basically have it be 2 separate projects, the 40 acres and the Mount Eldon, and then have the city parcel, then at least we could get the work done up above. But obviously, every bit we can get done before monsoon, the better, right? So unfortunately, NRCS came back and said because of the time frame that it extended beyond since the last flood event, that we could not, we thought maybe, gee, could we restart that piece and manage the risk that way? Or this is a risk management issue, right? And they said, no, we cannot do that. We cannot break it all apart because we'd already exceeded the time frame. So we're forging ahead, and there's some risk to that. The SHPO has indicated that they will support us. We're going to be meeting with them next week is the plan, and the goal is to have the MOA, the Memorandum of Understanding or Agreement, completed and back to the district and to the city, because the city owns the property. Will also have to be a signature and have approval of this MOA as well. And we hope to have that back by mid-March, mid to late March is the goal. But it will still create, a lot of challenges. Some other challenges that we have on this site is that we may need some additional easement and/or property. The city owns the parcel, from what we understand, outright, and then there's also a drainage easement that's adjacent to the parcel. And frankly, we're gonna have to work very closely with the city attorney on looking at that, and what does that all mean if in fact we do need, as they work through engineering and we identify how much land do we really need to accomplish what needs to be accomplished. So we'll have to work very closely on these acquisitions. I think another piece to this is that the NRCS funding cannot be used for acquisitions. And historically, the district, the flood control district's never paid for an easement. We didn't pay for any easements out in the Schultz area. We just finished a flood control project you may be aware of down in Mountain Dell. We didn't pay for one easement there. The district's always had the philosophy, whatever dollars we can get to effectuate flood control, we want it to go into the project to maximize the project and the benefit versus paying for the easement. So city has a different philosophy with that, because frankly, you acquire a lot more land than we've ever had to. It's a really different, dynamic within the city. So these are the kinds of things we're gonna have to work through as we work through this process. And we will need the cooperation of the landowners, certainly both with the 40 acres, Madeline Estates, as well as here, we'll need their cooperation if we're to move ahead. Next, we'll need an IGA between the city and the district, because the plan is that the district's going to engineer and construct the project, and then in effect turn it over to the city to maintain. And then, you know, the kind of last challenge that comes into this, which is typical of any project, is you've got to get the engineering done, you got to get the construction done. I think the likelihood of getting this element of the NRCS project done before the monsoon is pretty unlikely. I've been really direct with people and honest about what the prospects are. I think this one element will be difficult. Hopefully we can get the MOA approved in March, and we can start constructing on the other elements right away, and then start, you know, move through if we have enough time. It'll probably be very much influenced by weather, but other factors as well. Do we have the easements and land acquisition issues resolved and all of that? So I think this element, this piece, is the most vulnerable piece that we're going to see. But my sense is we'll probably end up having to come back and construct this element in the fall of 2022. I'm hopeful the other two elements we can get done prior to the monsoon season. So with that, I just want to add that, you know, I just want to reiterate that the district's doing everything possible to try to get as much done as quickly as we can. Remembering that even for one of the corridors out in Schultz, it took about 2 years, I mean, to get to the process, right, to get to the point where we are now. So things are moving very rapidly, and well, obviously we're really committed to getting it done. And you know, what we're looking to as well is that the city's continuing with the efforts within the city, so that, you know, there is this mutual benefit, right? We're proceeding along with the projects within the city that will then get the benefit of the reduction of the sediment. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions I think I'm going to wait for questions, I think, till the end, but happy to answer any questions. So
Yeah, I have a question. Thank you so
Sure.
much, Lucinda. So are we waiting for the NRCS till March before we're able to assess what easements are needed? Or on the city's end, what can we do to help? I mean, I know there's a lot of people involved in this, but what can we do to help? I know that we expedited some processes for the Dortha Inlet to be able to authorize city manager to approve the easements, approve the land acquisition needed to secure that. Is there anything we as council can do to support the expedition of or create an expedited process on our end for this project?
right now I can't, you know, it'll just depend on what, we've got to get additional engineering done. They've done, you know, this conceptual plan, but the reality is until we get our final approval, right now from NRCS, we've submitted all the documentation. The district has committed to the match. They have the funds from the federal, so I'm expecting they're all out this week, but next week I'm expecting to get the final agreement. And then we can move to the next level of engineering. I think we need to get that next level of engineering done to really identify, do we need more property or not, or more additional easement or not? And then at that point, you know, we will let you know, don't worry, you know I'm not shy. I'll be back to, you know, beg and cajole if in fact we do need council to support that effort. You know, we're trying to work within a number of constraints at this site. There's also, you know, a gas line in this area. There's a sewer line in this area. So there are other constraints to the project area, which in some ways, in terms of the impact to neighboring properties, is a positive, I'll say. We're also planning to do work on Mr. Wolf's property to the east of these basins, and that's part of what's being designed as well. So And they are extremely cooperative. They've been working very closely with us. So I'm not anticipating that there'll be any major issues at this stage, but as we go through the engineering, we'll let you know.
Thank you, Lucinda. And yeah, I know that the county staff, city staff are really working to expedite this as much as possible. And I know you'll be communicating with us where we can be of help. I want to help the situation as much as possible. So wherever potential obstacles we may see in the future that may gum up the works, I'd like to, on the city side, be proactive policy-wise or what's within our, jurisdiction and reach as a council body to ensure those obstacles do not hit at the last minute through this process. So, anyways, yeah, I entrust you will let us know for sure about that. I do see that Councilmember McCarthy has a question.
Thank you, Lucinda. Once this gets built, the one that's on the screen right now, its purpose is to collect debris. So like after every significant storm, we'd have to go in and clean it out, is that correct, and haul the debris away?
The level of maintenance will be really determined by the size of the flood events that we sustain. So if we get a set of smaller to moderate events, it won't require that level of repetitive clean out. However, if we were to get successive large events, then yes, could require a greater amount of maintenance. So the maintenance is really going to be driven by, the size of the events. And that's one of the important pieces of this, is that in the smaller events, we may not see as much sediment coming in here, but this will be really important when we get moderate to larger events. These basins will be much more are really going to pay for themselves, I'll say, during those types of events.
They'll earn their keep.
That's right, they will.
And I presume that there's access roads in there
There is an access road, correct?
so the trucks can get in there and scoop her out. Okay,
Correct,
thank you.
yeah, and they'll be designed to be able to support that.
Thank you, Councilmember, and thank you, Lucinda. I think we can proceed from here.
Thank you, and thank you, Mayor, for expressing your support. We really appreciate it.
All right, good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Gary Miller. I've been introduced in the past. I'm the new Water Services Engineering Section Director. As we move downstream from the Linda Vista improvements that Lucinda was just talking about, the next set of improvements that the city's working on inside city limits is the Dortha inlet and channel. So this would be between Cedar and Dortha. The purpose of this improvement, again, just like all of the improvements, is to reduce the flood risk. Primarily, this project is focused on Sunnyside by providing additional channel capacity within the Spruce Avenue wash. The current design has a 12-foot bottom. It's going to be concrete lined, and it's going to be delivered by our capital improvements section at the city. One of the big challenges that we're having with this project right now that we're trying to move through as fast as possible is property acquisition, which you guys have already given authority for. And then we have some significant utility conflicts through this area as well that have increased the cost of this project significantly. And we are working to complete this project before monsoons this next season. And then I'm going to turn it over to Scott to talk about Killip.
Sorry for all the tag teaming here, but as you can see, just lots of players working on this project. This one has been something of my focus for the last 6 weeks or so. I will tell you, it's coming to you next week, and it's fairly exciting because we've had a good partnership. We've had a good partnership with FUSD, our school district. As you know, they're building a new elementary school to the east of the former site of the elementary school that did sustain major damage over the summer. In fact, they had moved from the facility into a former middle school because it was just deemed terribly inappropriate to try to spend that level of infrastructure dollars in their budgets to try to repair and rehab the school to make it habitable again. So to their credit, we looked at the parcel, and the engineering teams all identified this as being a site that might be a very good opportunity to use for detention. FUSD has a goal to have some athletic fields for their students at the facility. Kind of the stars aligned, I have to be honest. With the current construction, they had a contractor, Core Construction, on board. They are scheduled to deliver that school project August of '22, so this coming school year. We had asked, and they were receptive to us taking a look at the use of the field amenities and trying to incorporate them into the larger flood modeling work. This is the effort that I was speaking to that made the engineer's job a little more difficult, as it was in the middle of the floodway, but they did a good job trying to figure out and calculate what we can get for a good value at this site and still make it safe for student use during non-flood events. To make a very long story short, we've now come to agreement with FUSD. Next week, you will be considering an IGA and final plans. All of the infrastructure system, the detention basins, and a 60-inch culvert system from the basins to our existing system in 3rd Street are now designed and ready to be delivered. We've entered into this IGA upon approval of yourselves and FUSD's school board on January 11th to move forward with construction utilizing their contractor at risk, Core Construction. We will assign a team member from the city of Flagstaff as an owner's representative, but generally it will be managed by FUSD and their construction team of Core. It is about a $3 million investment in stormwater infrastructure. Another $1 million total project cost of just over $4 million will come from FUSD. They agreed that some of their field infrastructure and their amenities that were going to go into place could be a good contribution. We're thankful for that, but we agreed that the stormwater infrastructure pieces made good sense for us to negotiate and to fund, as they really are a detention need for the city infrastructure. Within that IGA, you'll also find that there's language to the maintenance piece, to some future agreements in the event that we install some athletic amenities that they would like to see. But again, we've also asked them to be more open and willing to at least think about a more scaled back version of amenities at this time until we have some more certainty of the upstream improvements and some of the activities of the actual watershed. So we're thankful for their hard work and their effort to get it there. I want to thank Kevin Finsel. He worked tirelessly right before the Christmas holiday. We really worked in tandem with FUSD legal counsel to get this out before the holidays. That's why it's in your packets. That's why it's completed. But also thank you to our engineering partners. SWI engineered this as quickly as possible under a fair amount of stress. And of course, I've said it before, but all of our engineer team, the modeling effort, the feasibility effort, and we've asked a lot of this group, but this is a gigantic project that we will have in the ground if all goes well before July of '22, and that was the target. So we are on track for that, and we look forward to coming back to this council next week for that approval. And I will follow up with the FUSD group on January 11th, and we will hopefully be moving this one forward. Gary.
Tag me next. So we're going to move away from the museum fire flood area and focus on the South Mount Eldon area, also known as East Flagstaff. We've called it that over the last few months. The pictures you see here are of the Fanning Wash cleanup effort that we've done. So Fanning Wash basically starts from between the Skyline and Swiss Manor neighborhoods up on the north end, and then ends, well, it doesn't end, but what we've been focused on ends at the Fanning and Route 66 intersection. And so that's what these pictures below show, is the culvert that goes under Route 66. That picture in the middle is actually a picture of our new mini dozer that we purchased over this last monsoon season. It paid for itself after one use. The amount of money we spent on that one piece of equipment is what it costs us to clean out one section of box culvert. So it's been a great investment and utilized quite a bit. So the other portions of this channel also go through Bushmaster Park, along Linda Vista. I'm not gonna touch on any of those, but that's just kind of where that wash extends to, or through. So this is the upper side of Fanning Wash. This is between that Skyline and Swiss Manor neighborhood. You can see the improvements that we've done up there just to redefine the channel and clean up the wash in that area. And this is just before it goes under Steve's Boulevard. And then one thing I didn't touch on, there's still improvements that we need to do within Bushmaster Park. There's some line channels in that area that saw a lot of damage over the monsoon season with the flooding. And we're working on getting those repairs done before next monsoon season. This is a concept plan that we have prepared for the Shadow Mountain neighborhood, or on the north side of the Shadow Mountain neighborhood. We're still in discussions with the property owner. The property owner is the gas company. What's the name of the gas company? Kinder Morgan, thank you. And this is basically just a detention basin above the homes to capture some of those initial runoffs that we're seeing that are flooding or having impacts on the homes on the north side of Shadow Mountain area. We've actually reached out to the engineer recently to get additional costs on what the final design would cost and start to work on estimates for what that construction would look like, but we don't have those at this time. I believe that concludes my stuff. I'm going to turn it over to Andy.
Okay, funding and mitigation, and this bit is a bit more difficult, but as we had stated and Lucinda reiterated, sediment reduction is a critical prerequisite to the functioning of an existing infrastructure and future expansion of a system. So as we had noted earlier in the presentation, $3.5 million provided by the Forest Service for on-forest sediment reduction mitigation, and then $3 million, I believe it's a little more than $3 million actually, provided by Natural Resources Conservation Service to the County Flood Control District for sediment mitigation. And with that, there is a County Flood Control District match of, I believe, 25%. There is $3 million needed, city funds necessary for the Killip detention system. And we have applied for many FEMA, Federal Emergency Management Agency, HM hazard mitigation grants, as well as BRIC grants. Those are highly competitive, and the timeline is about 1 to 2 years. And as you all know, and hopefully we've all reiterated, we're working on a very fast timeline. We always say that many of us work in days, Lucinda works in hours, and so we're just trying to keep up with that pace and just charge ahead or forge ahead, I think was her term. The existing stormwater rate structure allows for about $1 million a year for citywide capital improvements, citywide throughout the entire stormwater infrastructure system. And the numbers that we're talking about for just this area far exceed that amount. We're looking at a rate structure potentially to address those needs, although those are very difficult policy decisions we know that you often face as city council members. The bond election could include some flood projects, but that's a year out, and so we just continue to look at all of our funding options in these mitigation measures. But we know the partners are at the table. Our federal delegation is certainly at the table. The Flood Control District, I think we can confidently say, has stepped up and really assisted and helped us and taken a lead role in many regards managing through all of this. Communication strategy. Sarah, are you with us?
Hi, Andy. I'm online. Can everyone hear me all right? Great. I got a thumbs up from the mayor. Well, good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Sarah Langley, Public Affairs Director. Wrapping up our presentation tonight, I'd like to provide you with an update on communications and public engagement. So in response to the request from Council for greater public involvement on museum flood area projects, I'd like to ask for Council's feedback tonight on our envisioned communications approach, specifically focusing on city-led museum flood mitigation projects. So the overall approach would be managed by the city, specifically the Public Affairs Office, working in close collaboration with our Public Works team and the Water Services Division. But then we'd also like to bring in Beta PR, which is a local public engagement firm. As you know, we face some incredibly tight deadlines for these mitigation projects, but fortunately we do have a cooperative contract with Beta PR, which would allow us to get started very quickly in the new year. It's also important to note that Beta PR currently works with the city on numerous other large infrastructure projects. For example, the Rio de Flag flood mitigation work and Coconino Estates, just to name a few. So they do have a proven track record and are familiar with our community here in Flagstaff. So the communications approach that we're proposing is outlined here on this slide. And some of these communications channels would be done cooperatively with the city and Beta, and others would be just handled internally by city staff. So the first step would be for city staff to work with Beta to develop a stakeholder database. And that would really allow us to ensure that we're reaching all of the relevant actors in our communications going forward. That would include private residences, businesses, community groups, as well as nonprofits and any other actors. And then Beta would also develop a specific project website that would act as an information repository for all the communications outputs that we produce during this process. City staff and Beta would also establish regular project updates to keep our stakeholders informed. These regular updates would take the shape of e-newsletters, which would be disseminated electronically through our stakeholder database and also through social media. And then those newsletters could also be printed and placed on bulletin boards around the impacted neighborhoods, and that could be an opportunity to utilize some volunteers to do that work. And then for larger project updates, we would like to utilize flyers that would be mailed to all of the residences in the area. And this would also be an opportunity for council members or any other interested volunteers to go door to door and deliver those flyers if you were so inclined. And then we would also use periodic videos to communicate these larger project updates. In terms of community meetings, we believe that work sessions are really the best way for staff and the council to interact with the community due to open meeting law and the ability for council to direct staff during these work sessions. As you know, we've already established that there will be regular work sessions on flood mitigation measures such as this. But in addition to that, city staff and Beta would like to incorporate several communication strategy meetings with different impacted neighborhoods, just as kind of a check-in to be sure that we're communicating through appropriate channels for each of the different neighborhoods. And then lastly, Beta PR and the city would establish a project-specific email address where residents could send questions to, and then we would all work collaboratively to make sure those questions are answered and track those responses. To wrap up, just some general notes. Translation and interpretation would be provided into Spanish for all materials to make sure that we're being as inclusive as possible. And then this kind of goes without stating, as you can see from tonight, but we'd also, of course, maintain close cooperation with the county, looking for areas of collaboration on any public engagement with county subject matter experts and public affairs staff, as well as supervisors when appropriate. And then lastly, just to note, we're looking to bring in Beta PR to help the city ramp up our communication efforts, but city staff would, of course, remain highly involved in all of these communications channels and really drive this effort. So that's an overview of our envisioned communications approach. And we have a draft contract between the city and Beta that will be coming before you during the January 4th meeting for your review. So with that, happy to take any questions or feedback. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. I have a couple questions. So the emergency management system for alerts, is there a way we can utilize that to inform the public of meetings that are going on about this issue? Or I'm just kind of curious, we're discussing a database. how would that database be compiled so that we can reach as many people as possible, and is that part of it?
Thank you, Mayor. Just a quick note, that would be through email address. So we would let people know, they would sign on and we could then keep them updated as they've kind of chosen to opt in. I don't want to comment on the emergency alerts. I don't know if anyone else on the team would be better suited for that, but I believe we would want to keep those emergency alerts for emergency items. I see Lucinda standing at the podium. I don't know if she has anything to add on.
Yeah, I would just add that using the emergency notification system, we need to be really very, very careful about how we use it. Because when we use it, we want people to know that it's an emergency, right? And they need to respond or pay attention and take action. And so I think we have to be pretty conscious about how we use that. I can tell you, the folks in that world, they covet that very carefully because they don't want it to become something that's overused, right? And then people just toss it aside like any text they might get. But to that end, I also wanted to add that we are evaluating the opportunity to install a siren system within the city limits area. And Wes Deason, our emergency manager, has worked with both our emergency notification system provider, a company by the name of Rave, and another firm that they work very closely with that has an integrated system with the siren system. And will actually enhance potentially some of our field communications as well. So we've pulled that information together. We're looking at a potential funding source for a part of that. It's upwards of probably about $200,000, $175,000, $200,000. So it's not a cheap effort, low cost effort, but so we'll see. We're seeing if we can identify a funding source, but and we should know hopefully after the first of the year, within the next few weeks, whether that funding source will come through or not, and then move forward. And that may come back to the council and to the district board in terms of looking at that as an investment. But I would not recommend. Now, know that we already have an email list that's well in excess of 400 names, so 400 email addresses. So we have a really sound system for communicating into the community already. And so I think we can certainly build on that. I'm very supportive of this plan and building on that. And I think there's more ways, as was noted earlier, using YouTube more and some other vehicles to help people understand what are we doing and why are we doing it? And why does it take the time it takes?
Thank you, Lucinda, and I'm really glad that we're working hard towards a siren system. I think that is going to be extremely important, especially for those who are not on cell phones, social media, emergency alerts. It's going to be extremely important. So I appreciate that, and also just know that if letters of support for grant funding or anything else that could assist in acquiring those sirens or anything else, know that we're obviously very supportive and can show that however you see as could be a indirect benefit towards that cause.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. And I do see Clifton has a comment. City Manager?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Council. Specific to Sarah Langley's discussion about public outreach and bringing on some outside help, which we contract with elsewhere throughout the community, Beta PR. I want to add to her comments made at the tail end of that presentation. Staff will continue, assuming we can go this direction, staff will continue to have significant involvement in these presentations and updates. We have to. I mean, we're closest to many of these issues. And we want to reach out to the neighborhoods who are very close to these issues, living with them on a day-to-day basis. The reason to bring in an outside consultant to help us with this is, one, they know the city. This is an area that they are already working in with other stormwater issues in the city. related projects. So it's a very good fit. But the most important thing I'd want to impress upon you is doing this not only helps us up our game on public outreach, which needs to happen, but it enables staff to stay focused on the work. And that's exactly what needs to happen. You've heard from many presenters today covering many disciplines: engineering, funding, stormwater, public works, and the list goes on. And that's just internal to the city, in addition to our friends at the Flood Control District, in addition to stakeholders with FUSD who have been more than responsive on the Killip Detention Basin project. The list goes on and on. Our Peak Engineering, Julie Lead, and many others, many engineers have their hands on these projects, and more importantly, their brain power going into these projects. We need to stay focused on the work, and we're talking about work now this year, but we'll be talking about this next year and the years to follow. It's a long road ahead. We do not want to cut ourselves short on the need to keep the public outreach going and to improve it. Hence the request, the suggestion to bring in some outside help to help us. But really, I wanted to make the point, this is not a passing of the baton. We will continue at the staff level to be fully engaged as we can in the community outreach aspects of this, but we truly need to stay focused on the work. And there's a lot to that, as you can now understand and appreciate. So we think it makes sense. We think it would be good for us. More importantly, it'd be good for the community and our impacted neighborhoods. Thank you.
Thank you, City Manager. And I wanted to note on the communication strategy that I know that we have gotten requests for changing of times to make these updates more amicable participation of many who work regular business hours. And I did speak with the city clerk today about this issue and would like to suggest that we kind of rotate so that the next meeting we have on the agenda that it states that we will not be discussing this until at least 5:30 p.m. So that way those who are working and so forth, who are among the impacted areas, can be more participatory in these flood updates. So in the future, I think it would be best to be able to have these discussions some of these discussions a little later. We are facing issues where also, for example, a night nurse can't actually be there if we're starting as late as 6 p.m. or later to be able to get to her work. We have issues of night janitors who also prefer the 3 o'clock meeting. So I'd like to see a rotating basis where if council need, for example, for the next one, we can take a break for an hour, hour and a half, whatever it may be, to make sure that we're not discussing this before 5:30. And then we will rotate it in terms of a normal part of the agenda starting at 3 o'clock versus making sure people know, okay, this month we're not going to be discussing it before 5:30, so that way we provide the opportunity for public input. So I just wanted to mention that in regards to our communications, to ensure we're inclusive of those with schedules that are more 8 to 5 versus those who are night shift, serving tables, et cetera, that may be starting work later and unable to participate at that time. So my apologies, a little long-winded, but want to open this up for particularly regarding communications, any questions, comments from council members? Councilmember McCarthy?
Thank you. I didn't even formally raise my hand.
I saw you looking for the button.
Thank you. We've talked about some specific projects, in the Dortha region, the Paradise region. I want to be assured that when we make these improvements, that they don't make it worse in other areas that are between these specific project areas. And I was, well,
Don't get all up at
I
once.
find it encouraging that like 4 people want to answer this, so we'll give it to Lucinda.
Andy may want to come up as well, but I think there's a very strong commitment both by the district and the city that for each project, there will be an analysis conducted that's called a no adverse impact analysis. And basically, working with J.E. Fuller, they're doing this kind of foundational study right now, right, of hydrology. And that, in effect, gets turned over to Julie, who will then start looking at feasibility. As the city moves forward with individual pieces of that overall project, let's say, they'll be conducting this no adverse impact analysis to make sure that anything that's done doesn't affect both downstream and upstream. And so standards, what we did in Schultz is we actually set a standard that the impacts could only be of a certain fairly low level. And then that analysis was run, usually at about the 60% engineering. And then at that point, if it showed that there were impacts, then you have to go back and re-engineer. You cannot create downstream or upstream impacts. And so I think that's the intent, and that is the plan that we've all discussed and agreed to. So, and that's a really important investment so that people have that assurance. And it also, obviously, it's a risk management for the city and the district as well.
So and we've talked about certain projects. Are there other projects sort of in the works between these projects too, or do these projects that we've talked about kind of cover it all?
Well, as Julie works, her firm works through and the city works through the feasibility of additional potential projects within the city, I would expect that other projects are going to come forward, right, in that process. So.
Thank you, Lucinda. And Councilmember McCarthy, so we talked about some projects that are moving forward pretty rapidly this evening. I always go back to the conversation we had at the capital discussion budget retreat with the city council at the end of September. And I didn't include that slide in this presentation, but we gave some thoughts prior to a feasibility analysis taking place on some projects that could continue to take place in that Spruce Avenue wash. So, for example, we've doubled the size of the culverts at Linda Vista. They would, right now, without the feasibility analysis, a layperson like myself would say, let's yet again double that size. It's a thought that's out there that we continue to discuss in cooperation with this feasibility analysis. Also, the box culvert at Cedar. And so we look at all of those pinch points. And that box culvert, Councilmember McCarthy, you go from corrugated metal pipe to boxes, prices go up, but that Cedar Avenue is a main travel corridor in our community, and that culvert underneath is a main corridor for this flood mitigation effort. So, yet doubling the size of that, for example. So, for me personally, those projects are always on my radar because it's, okay, we do the feasibility analysis, what do we do with it? And we have very robust discussions internally and with our cooperating engineers, and always, okay, analysis, but let's not get paralysis. Let's keep moving forward in that way, and that's what we're working on doing. So if you recall, those projects that we laid out, I think sum total was a number that we had put out there was 18 million, and so it's a costly endeavor. And then we have an idea that came forward in terms of diverting the water, and that was one option that we had talked about. So you have the Spruce Avenue wash, and then there's this notion that can you get it around the neighborhood? Something that we talk about that's also very, very costly, but it's always something. And that came from the summit. And so I'm sorry for the long, Lucinda answered your question. I just wanted to add that in there as well.
All right, well, I appreciate all your good work. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, you, Councilman McCarthy. I guess on that note, are there grants out right now or being prepped for that stretch on Grandview for the Linda Vista Culvert as well as the on Cedar? What stage in that are we to being able to fund that part? Because we've been discussing a lot of what is necessary to begin with, but what are the plans for next steps on funding?
We
for
have some
that
FEMA, oh, sorry, Mayor, members of the council. Julie, you want to take that one? We have some FEMA grants that are out there. Ed Schenk, our stormwater manager, has actually done a good job. He's taken a couple days. We locked him in his office and he cranked out some grants, submitted them through Stacy BK. One thing I will note on that, and it's not that we would want to turn away funding from other sources, but the original Linda Vista culvert upsizing, we were to utilize a grant for that money while we were awarded just wasn't there. And so we went ahead and forged ahead and did that project because we hadn't received the grant funds yet. We are all looking at the infrastructure bill with hope and hoping that there will be, and we know that our federal delegation is very much paying attention and they're involved in our conversations. Particularly, we have a great relationship with our members of staff. So, Julie.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. I was feeling a little left out, so appreciate the opportunity to get up and speak to you. Councilmember McCarthy, I think this is going to be some more specifics related to your question about what we've been working on. So for the past 6 weeks, we have been running parallel with J.E. Fuller, who's been doing the dry hydrology with Coconino County Flood Control District. And the work that we have been focused on and that we have been accelerating is how we can maximize the existing system, because that is probably the best first approach. The best first approach is to take, we have channel. How deep can we make that channel? How wide can we make that channel and still work within the constraints that we have? The pipe system through Spruce and 3rd Street, how much bigger can we make that and fit that in the right of way and still avoid other gravity utilities that are necessary and essential? So that is the work that we've been doing for the past 6 weeks. And as you know, we have to start on the downstream end and work our way up. And we accelerated this piece because we needed to see how it was going to work with the Killip Detention Basin and the Dortha Inlet. And I would say in the 20 years that I've been a consultant in Flagstaff, an engineering consultant here, I have never had this experience of collaboration to this level. It has been impressive. So we have weekly TAC meetings where we have consulting engineering firms that get together. We have the County Flood Control District, and we have capital improvements, water services, and public works that all come together weekly for these TAC meetings to discuss these things. And so as we're working our way through this feasibility study, we're fitting in these pieces so that when you're making that investment in the Killip Detention Basin, that the plan that we're looking at and that we're talking about and pulling together as a team is going to fit in the long term. So taking that piece by piece and working our way up. Those are some specifics of the work that we've been doing. It's in peer review right now, that first draft of what we can do in the existing system and the footprint, starting at the box outlet at the Speedway and Blimpie, and working all the way up to the basins that Natural Channel Design is working on, north of Linda Vista. Yep, thank you.
Thank you. I just got a notification. We do have a public comment about this item. So I'd be happy to take it at this point. City Clerk.
Thank you, Mayor. We have Don Rodriguez.
I've been sitting back here listening, and thank you, everyone, for coming and for working on this. You guys saw me last time. My thoughts aren't organized in speaking, so please be patient with me. Just one request. You know, I'm not very smart, and I don't understand what this district is. I hear it over and over, maybe in the correspondence we can have. I think one time I saw on Facebook the supervisors of the district there, maybe their contact information. Are those the only people that are supervising it? I heard the words no adverse impact analysis. Can I see the report for Dortha that was done there? Because I had some very extreme concerns about that, how that was done. Also, man, those storms, they had us on our toes. All the residents up and downstream, everywhere. And that August 17th, or I don't know which day, but it was the whole town was flooded. And people were just going nuts, moving sandbags and everything. And I remember this. I believe it was Lucinda that said, all the time she reminds us, and I'm grateful because I'm slow, and she says, every flood event is different. Every area is different. So everybody's moving sandbags, and even the city and county, and we should be trying to, fix. We don't know if it's coming, where it's coming from, but, and I know it's very important. You cannot have downstream or upstream impacts, but what if in all this chaos we do? What happens? Because that happened on Dortha, and I don't want to go into the details, but we're coming up to another year. I mean, who knows, the monsoons, what was that word they said? The incisors, and it's worse than it was before. Will somebody listen to us or just brush us off or I mean, we've lived there for 18 years, and I think, we're not engineers, but we did build a road. My husband has the only road on any tribal reservation in the United States in a flood zone. So, can we maybe listen to some people, the neighbors, and we get all our information from the neighbors too. So I just have these questions, and maybe somebody can get back to me about that. I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Don. To address your first question about the district, could we have somebody to speak to kind of the overlaying of administrations and so forth? Because this does become extremely confusing with so many stakeholders. I think that's thank you, Don. I think that's an important thing for us to better communicate.
Certainly, and I'm happy. We've talked several times, and I'm happy to meet with you and go over it as well and maybe show you on paper. But so in the state of Arizona, counties don't have stormwater authority, unlike cities. Cities and towns have the authority to have a stormwater fee or levy a tax, in effect, for stormwater fee, projects and activities and maintenance within their jurisdictions. Counties do not, but back in 1984, the state legislature established the ability for counties to create what's called a flood control district. And that flood control district has similar but different authorities and responsibilities from a city or a town jurisdiction. So at the county doesn't have any, the county itself as a political entity doesn't have any authority or ability to effectuate flood control. Only the flood control district does. The Board of Supervisors that sits as the Board of Supervisors for the county also sits as the Board of Directors for the flood control district. So it is confusing. But it's really a separate entity under the state of Arizona, just like the city of Flagstaff is separate from the county, just like the city of Flagstaff is separate from the city of Page. They're all separate jurisdictions. So when the board sits as the flood control district, those are the only decisions they can make relative to flood control. So it's really a legal statutory requirement. But it's important because the flood control district does have the authority to tax, to levy a secondary property tax, and that's where the funding comes from. That funds the district. And the funds that we've been using now, well in excess of $5 million toward museum mitigation efforts is where that funding is coming from. So yeah, it is confusing. You think the county and it's the same people, but they are the same elected officials, but it's a different legal entity, so.
Yeah, thank you, Lucinda, for the explanation. This whole thing, it gets so bureaucratically intertwined and a lot of layers. And I mean, I think we all really want to get something accomplished and done quickly. And we're making lots of movements, and we're seeing a lot of that. Just a lot of hurdles that we keep facing and sometimes don't expect. So with that, do we have any other questions, comments regarding this from council? Councilmember Shimoni?
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you all for the presentation today and all of your hard work. I just wanted to express gratitude to all the different partners and agencies involved in this effort. Mayor, I really do appreciate your comments about the start time of future updates and just the communication plan that Sarah laid out in engagement with the public, and obviously gratitude to the public who's engaging with us tonight and ongoing. We're working through it. It sounds like we're doing some really good stuff, and there's some good plans in the works, and I just have gratitude for all of you. So yeah, keep us in mind in terms of what we can do to support and continue to support, and we appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Shimoni. Well, then with that, I'm not seeing any further C's or Q's in the chat box or hands raised. I think this would be a good time to take a little break before we go to the next agenda item. So let's take 15 minutes, be here at 5:05 p.m. and we will get into the discussion of potential City Council Code of Conduct and Ethics Policy. So thank you. And well, then let's get started here.